Hey guys, this is the Successful Investor Club, the place where we learn how to invest and do not speculate. In the previous video, we learned how to calculate the profitability and liquidity of a business. In case you haven't watched it yet, I'll put the link in the description. Today we'll learn the ratios that will help us evaluate different companies such as the so-called value stocks or established companies. On the one hand, established businesses are considered to involve a lower risk, but on the other hand, their growth is considered to be more limited. That's why we'll also talk about ratios used to evaluate the so-called growth stocks. They are fast-growing companies that often don't make pure profits. Using these ratios, we will be able to predict better the risk that is involved. As we mentioned in the previous video, you shouldn't be bothered by the different numbers and percentages, as they are pretty straightforward and they are not complicated. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video and sharing it with a friend. The first ratio that we'll talk about is the price to sales ratios. It shows the company's price compared to its revenue, and if the company is overvalued or undervalued, the ratio will show this. In order to find the price to sales ratio, we need to divide the price of the business, in other words, its market capitalization, by the business's revenue. We can find the company's price simply by making a quick Google search, and the revenue, as we learned from the last video, we can find on top of the company's income statement. The result of the price to sales ratio shows us how many times we overpay the company's revenue. Let's look at a few examples to understand this better. During the making of this video, the market capitalization of Tesla was 596 billion, while its revenue was 35 billion. This gives us a PS ratio of 16.6, showing us that we pay almost 17 times Tesla's revenue to become part of the shareholders. For comparison, let's look at NIO. Its market capitalization is 47 billion and its revenue is 3.5 billion. This gives us a PS ratio of 13.4. In this case, the PS ratio shows that based on the revenue, NIO is the cheaper stock. A low PS ratio is good while a high PS ratio is bad. And as shown in our example, every time we use the PS ratio for a given company, we need to compare it with the PS ratio of a different company in the same industry. Just like when we go shopping, we don't compare an apple to a banana. The negative aspect of the PS ratio is that the business's profit is not included in the calculation. This ratio is often used when comparing growth stocks, companies that are just starting to be profitable or companies that still don't make any profits. Now let's talk about the return on equity ratio, or ROE. It shows us how effective the company's financial performance is and is one of the favorites and most used ratios by Warren Buffett. We use it to find out whether a company is managing its capital efficiently. In order to find the ROE, short for return on equity, we need to divide the company's net income by its shareholders' equity. We can see the net income on the income statement and we find the shareholders' equity on the balance sheet. As we learned in the last video, the equity is always given on the balance sheet and is calculated by subtracting the total liabilities from the total assets. It's crucial to know what is considered a good ROE ratio. We want it to be higher than the average annual growth of the S&P 500 index. The average annual growth of the S&P 500 index is 10% per year. Thus, we want to see an ROE between 10 and 14% as always. Remember to compare companies within the same industry. As an example, let's look at Walmart. In 2020, the company's net income was 14.88 billion and the shareholders' equity was 74.67 billion. By dividing the net income by the shareholders' equity and multiplying it by 100, we find the ROE of 19.92%. Now let's compare Walmart to one of its main competitors, Costco. In 2020, Costco had a net income of $4 billion and they had a shareholders' equity of $18.28 billion. This gives an ROE of 21.88%, and this shows us that in 2020 Costco used their pure capital slightly more efficiently than Walmart. However, you should keep in mind that many additional calculations and analysis need to be made before deciding whether an investment in a company will be better than an investment in another company. Now let's talk about the return on assets ratio. The following ratio is used to evaluate the effectiveness of the financial mechanism of a given company. This time we look at the effectiveness of managing all of the assets and not just the pure capital. We can find the ROA, short for return on assets, by dividing the net income by the company's total assets. We multiply the result by 100 to see the number as a percentage. We can find the net income on the income statement and the total assets can be found on the balance sheet. Now let's talk about the differences between the ROE and ROA. The ROA ratio includes the liabilities while the ROE ratio does not. This is because the company's total assets are equal to the shareholders' equity, which is the pure capital of the company plus the long-term liabilities. The ROE shows us the returns compared to the capital, while the ROA ratio shows us the return compared to the capital plus the return compared to the liabilities. If a company does not have any liabilities, the ROE always equals the ROA, because the equity or the pure capital is equal to the total liabilities subtracted from the total assets. Then when the total liabilities increase, the pure capital will decrease, and when the pure capital decreases compared to the net income, the ROE will increase. To better understand all that we just said, let's take an example using two properties. Both properties cost $100,000 each. They are on the same street and they are completely identical. The net income of the first property is $5,000 per year and we buy it for $100,000 paid in cash. Therefore, our pure capital in this property is $100,000. We divide the net income by the equity and multiply the result by 100. We get an ROE of 5%. Because we paid for the property in cash and have no liabilities, the ROE equals the ROA. The second property also has a net income of $5,000 per year. However, this time we bought the property using a loan and made a down payment of $10,000. Therefore, our pure capital in this property is $10,000 and the rest $90,000 are liabilities. Adding both these numbers together gives us the price of the total assets. Using the ROA and ROE ratios, we find a ROA of 5% and an impressive ROE of 50%. This is caused because when the liabilities increase, the ROE also increases, as we mentioned earlier in the video. The higher ROA, the better, and as always, we need to compare companies within the same industry. To sum up, we learned the calculations are quite easy and we shouldn't be annoyed by them. We learned what the price to sales ratio is and that we use it when evaluating fast growing companies, also known as growth stocks. We also learned about one of Buffett's favorite ratios, the ROE, how this is different than the ROA, and how to use both of these ratios to evaluate the effectiveness of a business. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and sharing it with a friend. Thank you and see you next time.